First and foremost, I guess all day you've been hearing about how big the IoT market could be and the number of devices that could potentially be connected, etc. I think I'm going to take a very high-level view of maybe some broader ways of looking at the Internet of Things. So first and foremost, if we take a step back, apart from the fact that there is a $15 trillion market size associated with notionally, why else is this really interesting? And I'm going to take a certain approach that has pertinence to what I'm doing, and my work, a lot of my work has to do with interventions and innovation methodologies for very, very complex and large challenges such as climate change, such as the energy issues, such as water scarcity, etc. And I want to cast it in that kind of a frame, right? So first and foremost, the Internet of Things, what I would like to do is I would like to reframe the word things, because things kind of conjures up in our mind that we are looking at thermostats, devices, etc., and they're things. Like, so this is now a connected device because we have unlimited IP and sensors and so on. But I think it's important for us to look at what it really might mean, and what it means to me is that anything on the planet could be connected, and not just things, but entire processes, entire events, behaviors, outcomes. There are ways in which we could create new heuristics. So we could drop a whole bunch of sensors in a forest, and we could now we could sense over a timeline what's happening. Or we could, as the previous speaker was speaking about, we could instrument an entire city. But because of some unique things about this new ecosystem, there are some new affordances that might be possible, right? So first and foremost, let's say that we have this, I'm using this new term just to be contrary, just to get away from the things kind of a mindset, and I'm calling it the Internet of Planetary Elements, right? I just came up with this term last night. But what I'm trying to get at is that any Internet of Things system has the identity and the sensing, the connectivity and the data, and of course, very importantly, the interpretation of the data. So you might want to know what context it's in, what the backdrop is, in the context of what kind of pattern that this particular thing is happening, and that's what makes it salient or not. But that's information coming in this way. But what if you could send information, you could control things? That's where things become particularly interesting, and that's where, as a designer, as an intervention designer, for us it becomes really, really interesting, because if you have these elements and you are simultaneously connecting things, but remember that in this universe of Internet of Things, one of the 7 billion components are humans. You are a part of the Internet of Things, because it's very easy for the larger system to detect you as an entity, and all the things that can be sensed about you, or your family, or your household, or your home, or the tree in your backyard. All of these can now be a part of that ecosystem. But what it allows us to do is you're creating completely new experiences that we have not understood what they might be. But we are also creating new kind of markets. But not just markets, but entire market instruments. We can, for example, monetize behavior, which is not something we can do right now, and we can create a market instrument around that. But we are essentially creating a larger ecosystem of possibilities that are completely unprecedented. I think our imagination is the real bottleneck, and the technology is not the bottleneck. And we need to escape the confines of the way we've thought of legacy system, because this is really a frame changer, right? But at the human level, we are giving, this has the ability to give humans very new types of choices. And not just choices like big ones saying that, hey, do you want to reduce your mortgage by a year because, and you say, okay, what's the catch? You say, well, give us a certain section of your roof, no questions asked. You give us a part of your roof, we'll do whatever it is that we want to do with it. It happens to have something to do with solar, but we can reduce your mortgage by a year, right? That is a certain kind of deal I can give, right? But I can actually give very tiny little choices, as to whether I carpool with a colleague who I'm in the middle of a conversation with or not. Whether on the way back, it's a good thing for me to drop by the grocery store or not because I'm out of milk. Completely new types of choices, right? But what that gets at is what I'm most interested in, and you might hear some more from the next speaker as well, which is new behaviors and completely new classes of interventions to challenges that have proved to be extremely difficult and obdurate, okay? So in the experience realm, I'm just going to throw a vignette. Here's a woman who's headed to the airport, and the door is basically telling her that you're forgetting your passport, right? So this kind of a scenario is very conceivable once you have all the pieces in place. The only thing is that when this happens, there might not be something like a passport. You might be your own passport, if you think about it. If you have it standardized enough, the fact that every system recognizes that you are you is passport enough, right? So even this might be not visionary enough. But I think let's go back to that part of the system that is particularly interesting and particularly complex, which is the humans. And the reason why we find it particularly interesting is that me and my colleagues work with really, really complex challenges that do not fit neatly in any kind of a disciplinary or industry silo. They just happen to transgress every boundary, and those challenges have no respect for our disciplinary boundaries or the thinking that is associated with those disciplinary boundaries. This is where large sociological forces and economic forces and governance issues and technological infrastructure and human behavior at the individual level or at the level of the moment, and issues of large political backdrops, etc., are all like a bowl of spaghetti, and what you have to do as an intervention designer is to essentially do system acupuncture. You're trying to figure out where can I put the acupuncture needles in what kind of coordination such that you get very different outcomes and trajectories for the future. Now, a lot of our bigger challenges, and I'm going to make somewhat of a bold statement here, I think we've come to a very, very critical moment in the history of civilization. We are on a ship where we are going about our lives and partying, but meanwhile it's headed towards the rocks. And we have a very small amount of time to make extremely radical changes to the way we are operating, or things are going to go worse in dramatic ways, in ways that we cannot control. And this is not just a personal opinion, this is what the scientific community that I work with are talking about in their most watered down estimates. Things are much worse than we think it is. And a lot of our problems are exponential in nature, but what we know how to do when things go well is something like an S-curve. So there's a theoretical gap, and we are trying, at some level, we are trying to solve exponential problems with linear solutions. So we need non-linear solutions to non-linear problems, which is why the Internet of Things for us is particularly interesting. Now, we can do things that are interesting in terms of what we've done before and pat ourselves in the back, or flip it around and say, are we moving the needle at a scale big enough or at a pace fast enough? And these are not just social concerns or planetary concerns and so on. These are massive markets. These are fantastic opportunities to create next generation systems and next generation businesses. So for us, scale impact has the connotation of transforming system behavior. It's not just transforming a technology or something. You're looking at the system and it has a behavior. How do you change the behavior? And among that is the big component, which is human behavior. Now, we think of human behavior in a somewhat of a peculiar way. I'm not a behavioral scientist, and I wasn't trained as a behavioral scientist. But for the last 8 years, I've been working very, very closely with 5 different types of behavioral scientists. And it's very interesting as to what is possible. Because if you look at systems from a distance, and you think of them as, at any system, as a gear train where there's input going in and output going out, and those of you who are engineers, you know that every spur gear in a gear train will steal a certain efficiency, and 0.7 is a pretty interesting, a good efficiency, but the total efficiency is not the sum, but the product, right? And it doesn't take that many stages before which the system efficiency is brought down to its knees, right? If you look at the larger system and what we want to achieve, the human aspect is often the bottleneck. That's where a lot of things fail. And so behavior is often the choke point. The technology isn't. The technology is actually relatively the easy part. But if you look at the possibility of behavior, it allows us to look at solutions not just from the supply point of view, but also from the demand point of view simultaneously. And that is a very, very important kind of distinction where supposing you're looking at the energy crisis, you can supply new kinds of renewables at the same time as change the demand for it. And so the targets become very, very different. And if you can actually change demand, that's like having found a new oil field, right? That's tantamount to it. But the other thing is if you change behavior, it is actually theoretically possible to scale it much faster than infrastructure. And that's important because if you do have a new, let's say a new model for an internal combustion engine, the amount of time it will take for you to replace the entire fleet of cars in America is a very long period of time. Compared to that, let's ask ourselves how many years it took for a good part of the population of the US to get on Facebook, right? So behavior is much faster, and that's important because we simply do not have time when it comes to some of our larger issues. Time is not on our side. So when we look at human behavior, we shake our heads, and most people who are, particularly people who are trained in engineering and so on, who are essentially conditioned to think of humans as being that irritatingly unnecessary component of the job. Well, it turns out that behavior is not easy to change. It's like we are caught in certain kind of traps. We are caught in certain trenches. And the question then becomes, is it possible to create other behavior trenches and find ways of nudging people in there, right? Now, here's just an example, right? This is a bunch of countries in Europe, and this is something which is very personal to people, whether they're committing to donating their organs upon their death or not, right? It's something which is, not just like, hey, will you buy 2% milk or not, right? This is something pretty hefty, but vastly different results in different countries, and the only determinant is where the choice that was given to people was in the form of an opt-in or an opt-out, where the default was, yes, I'm doing it, and you have to say, no, I'm not going to do it, or the default is that you are not doing it unless you say yes, and that makes all the difference. So what we found from all these behavioral scientists is that behavioral sciences are able to influence behavior, not just characterize it. And at some level, the people who are from marketing out here, they're saying we've done it all along. Absolutely, right? Marketing is one of the most, probably the very highly applied behavioral science there is. But, sorry, I went back by mistake. But if you can change behavior, then behavior is a technology, right? If you think about what technology is in its essence, it's a way of predictably changing something. Whether it is atoms or a round wheel made of wood or a pail with a rope, it's technology, right? We are going to laugh at our own technology in 50 years, but as an essence, if you can change behavior, it is a technology. Now, why am I bringing behavior in such a heavy way in this kind of a talk? That's because when we are not just thinking about hey, can we make more money, but we are thinking more intelligently in our businesses and saying, what is a really interesting need space that we can go and make a blue ocean strategy where there are no competitors, and the water is not red with all the blood of the sharks feeding after the same food, with very little distinction, and the markets are massive, but meanwhile, one can actually make a difference. And you're saying, okay, there is the human side of the things you could attack and say, okay, can we do something with, say, let's say energy or water? We are in California with a massive water crisis. Can you get people to save a little more water or energy? And on the infrastructure, you're saying, can we onboard people onto solar faster, etc. But if behavior is a technology, then it's a continuum. It is not something you make a distinction in. And then what you can do are create platforms where the elements of it are fungible. There is, just like in engineering, there used to be a time where you did certain things in mechanical systems, and the software did something else, and now you can actually ask, hey, this function, should we do it in software or firmware or in a mechanical system, and we think of them as fungible to a large extent. So in the same metaphor, this is also something that's possible. So if you now combine certain things, but in interesting ways, so you're combining data, you're combining sensing, you're combining context awareness. So am I, like, in what condition what is the right question to ask in this particular context, and that's a system that the system is aware of that. And then you throw in a bunch of control systems, but then you create an interface system that becomes more ambient. So you are actually interacting with the world in new ways because the ways that the system is feeding back to you is somewhat changed. Every door looks a little different because it has an element, it is giving you information, the walls are a little different, there are things around that are giving you cues, your car is telling you new things, so the interfaces are a little more ambient, and then the interaction with the person is not one way, it's two way. So they're not just acting on the system, but there's very rapid feedback coming in that's allowing for nudges, that's allowing for new choices, new architectures, etc. But then you combine that with a whole bunch of new type of transactions and new business models that don't exist right now. That can create a completely new ecosystem for businesses. And so then what you do is you give not just an individual, but entire institutions a completely new choice architecture. So if a city is seeing a tremendous influx of people and doesn't know what to do with its housing that's overwrought, or it has a carbon emissions reduction target, you can create large high-level heuristics that then ripple down into choices that people are making without them realizing that they're actually that they're helping the city reduce the carbon emissions. You can actually tie high-level policy issues with things that are serving small businesses, driving trade, all sorts of things, right? So it's a very high-level kind of abstract view of things. But essentially what I'm saying is that if you are thinking in this way and not just thinking about instrumenting this, well, by all means, let's instrument this as well. But if you're thinking of it with some fundamental mechanics in place, then what you have are the mechanisms of very large-scale transformation. And right now, the world is hurting for large-scale transformation. Just look around you and look at the scale of the challenges. There are massive needs, there are massive markets, and here's we are a community of very, very sharp people, so we could be intervening in very interesting ways. With that, I'll I'll close. Thank you.